the winter of December 1944, Europe was freezing, and the world believed the war was nearing its end. But deep within the dense forests of Belgium, 250,000 German soldiers were preparing one last, desperate strike. Without warning, the sky erupted. The largest battle ever fought by the US Army began. Men froze, towns burned, and history stood on the brink. Welcome to Mind Cipher, where mystery meets history. Today, we journey into one of the most brutal and unexpected battles of World War II. This is the story of the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's final gamble, and the clash that would shape the war's end. It was December 1944. Europe was freezing under one of the harshest winters of the century. The war, it seemed, was almost over. After the D-Day landings in June, Allied forces had pushed across France, liberating city after city. Paris was free. Brussels had fallen, and the Nazi army appeared to be on the edge of collapse. To the American and British troops resting in the dense forests of Belgium and Luxembourg, the war felt like it was winding down. Many soldiers believed they'd be home by Christmas, but behind the enemy lines, Adolf Hitler had other plans. His empire was crumbling. His generals were losing faith, and yet, he was not ready to surrender. In the depths of his mountain fortress, Hitler crafted a desperate plan. One that would strike directly through the Allied lines, divide their armies, and perhaps force them into negotiating peace. On Germany's terms, he called it Wacht am Rhein, the Watch on the Rhine. But history would remember it by another name, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's plan was bold, maybe even insane. He wanted to attack through the Ardennes, a region of dense forest, steep hills, and narrow roads. The Allies believed it was too difficult for large-scale warfare. They left it lightly defended, holding the line with inexperienced or exhausted troops. Hitler saw that as an opportunity. His goal, punch through the Allied lines, seize the port of Antwerp in Belgium, and cut the British and American forces in half. If successful, he could stall the Allied advance, and perhaps even change the course of the war. But it was a huge risk. Germany's army was running out of men, fuel, and supplies. Many generals, including Gerd von Rundstedt and Morel, warned Hitler that the plan was unrealistic, but Hitler's mind was set. He believed fate was giving him one last chance to strike. In the quiet forests of the Ardennes, American soldiers of the 99th and 106th Infantry Divisions were dug in along a 90-mile front. It was supposed to be a quiet sector, a place to rest and recover from months of fighting. They spent their days guarding bridges, writing letters home, and sharing whatever warmth they could find. One young soldier, Private Ralph, he wrote in a letter to his parents on December 14th. "It's cold, but peaceful here. The trees are heavy with snow, and it almost feels like home. We hear rumors the Germans are finished. Maybe this will be over soon." He didn't know that. Just across the forest, 250,000 German troops were quietly gathering, hidden by the mist and trees. To make his plan work, Hitler gathered everything he had left: panzer divisions, SS units, and even teenage soldiers from the Hitler Youth. They brought with them over 1,000 tanks, 2,000 artillery pieces, and some of the best remaining German commanders, including Sepp Dietrich and Joachim Peiper of the feared Waffen-SS. They were ordered to move only at night, to avoid detection from Allied aircraft. By mid-December, 3 German armies were in position, stretching from Monchaux in the north to Echternach in the south. On December 16, 1944, at 5:30 in the morning, the silence of the Ardennes was shattered. A deafening roar rolled through the forest as thousands of German artillery guns opened fire. Shells ripped through the snowy trees, exploding among American foxholes and camps. One survivor from the 106th Division recalled, "The whole earth just lifted up. We didn't know what was happening. It was like the world had exploded." Within hours, German tanks and infantry surged through the fog, hitting the American lines with overwhelming force. The US soldiers, caught completely off guard, scrambled to fight back. Many units were surrounded or cut off within the first day. Communications broke down. The weather was so bad that Allied planes couldn't take off. Snow and fog blanketed the battlefield, hiding the German advance. The attack was working. The Allies were stunned. As the German army punched deep into the Allied lines, a huge dent began to form on the map, a bulge that would give the battle its name. Entire towns fell one by one. Clairvaux, Saint-Vith, and Wiltz were overrun. Thousands of American soldiers were taken prisoner. German armored columns moved fast, capturing fuel depots and supply trucks as they went. In one report from an American unit, a radio operator sent a desperate message before being captured. "We are surrounded. Ammunition almost gone. God help us all." For the next few days, chaos reigned. Some American units held out here. Others were forced to surrender after exhausting every bullet. But amid the confusion, one town would soon become the symbol of resistance. Bastogne was a small Belgian town, strategically vital because it sat at the crossroads of 7 major roads. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled movement across the Ardennes. By December 19th, the Germans had surrounded the town completely. Inside were about 10,000 American soldiers, mostly from the 101st Airborne Division, commanded by Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe. They were cut off from supplies, low on ammunition, and freezing in temperatures that dropped below -10 degrees Celsius. Still, they refused to surrender. When the Germans sent a message demanding their surrender, General McAuliffe famously replied with just one word: nuts. That single word became a symbol of defiance and courage across the Allied front. For the soldiers on both sides, the battle was a nightmare. Blizzards buried the dead. Frostbite and hunger were constant. Foxholes filled with snow and blood. Private Henry Manning of the 101st Airborne later wrote in his diary, "The cold was worse than the bullets. We burned anything we could find. Crates, doors, even our own rations. The sky was gray for days. No sun, no warmth, just the sound of distant gunfire." Meanwhile, German soldiers, many of them teenagers, fought with equal desperation. Corporal Erich Menzel wrote in a letter found later on his body, "They told us this would be our final victory, but I see only snow, death, and silence. The tanks keep moving, but I can't feel my hands anymore." Both sides were trapped in a frozen hell. Back at Allied headquarters, panic spread as reports of the attack came in. General Eisenhower realized this was not a small counterattack, it was a massive offensive. He ordered immediate reinforcements. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was fighting further south, made a bold promise. He told Eisenhower he could turn his army 90 degrees north and reach Bastogne within 48 hours. Eisenhower was skeptical, but Patton did it. His troops began one of the most remarkable maneuvers of the war, moving through snow and ice to relieve the surrounded forces. As Patton's men advanced, the weather began to clear, and Allied planes finally returned to the skies. With the skies open again, American bombers and fighters launched devastating attacks on German supply lines and tanks. The Luftwaffe, once a fearsome air force, was no match. German fuel shortages grew worse. Their tanks began to stall in the snow. By Christmas Eve, the German advance had slowed dramatically. The bulge on the map was shrinking. The Allies were regrouping and ready to strike back. But the battle was far from over. The Ardennes forest, once quiet and peaceful, had become a graveyard of men and machines. Thousands lay frozen in the snow, some never found. In the words of one American soldier, written on a scrap of paper found after the war, "It wasn't about glory, it was about surviving another night." The Battle of the Bulge had begun as Hitler's last gamble, a plan to divide the Allies and save his collapsing empire. But now, as 1944 drew to a close, it would become a test of endurance, courage, and the unbreakable will of those who refused to fall. This was only the beginning. By late December 1944, Bastogne was surrounded. 10,000 American soldiers from the 101st Airborne, the 10th Armored Division, and supporting units were trapped inside the small Belgian town. German artillery pounded their positions day and night. Food was running out. Ammunition was scarce. The men huddled in basements, barns, and half-destroyed houses, trying to keep warm. The temperature dropped to nearly -20 degrees Celsius. Frostbite spread quickly. The wounded froze to death before medics could reach them. Even the bandages stiffened like cardboard in the cold. Yet, despite everything, the Americans held the line. Corporal James P. We Martin of the 101st Airborne later recalled, "We were surrounded, short on everything, and freezing, but nobody talked about surrender. We were too damn stubborn. While soldiers fought and froze, the people of Bastogne suffered quietly. Families hid in cellars, surviving on scraps of bread and melted snow. Many risked their lives to help the wounded Americans. A Belgian nurse named Renée Lamere. She treated dozens of soldiers in a makeshift hospital until Christmas Eve, when a German bomb struck the building. Renée was killed instantly. In his journal, an American medic wrote, "She saved more lives than we could count. She died doing what none of us will ever forget." Her story became a symbol of courage amid horror. 4 days, the fog hung low and thick. The Allies couldn't send planes for supplies or airstrikes. The only lifeline was the narrow, icy roads still under enemy fire. Then, on December 23rd, the skies cleared. The first sound the soldiers heard that morning wasn't the artillery. It was the distant hum of engines. Hundreds of American C-47 transport planes appeared overhead, dropping food, ammunition, and medical supplies by parachute. The men in Bastogne cheered, waving their helmets and rifles in the air. Private Donald Bulge remembered, "It felt like Christmas came from the sky. We were starving, freezing, and suddenly there was hope again." The weather that had once protected the Germans now turned against them. Back in his headquarters in the Eifel Mountains, Adolf Hitler was convinced the offensive would still succeed. He believed his troops would capture Bastogne and march straight to the River Meuse. But the reality on the ground was collapsing. The German supply lines were stretched to the breaking point. Fuel trucks couldn't keep up. Every lost tank was irreplaceable. General Heinz Guderian, the architect of Blitzkrieg, warned Hitler, "This offensive is doomed. We do not have the strength, nor the fuel." But Hitler refused to listen. He ordered his commanders to keep pushing, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, his best armored divisions, the 1st SS Panzer and the 2nd Panzer, were running on fumes. Among the German spearheads was SS Colonel Joachim Peiper, leading a column of tanks and infantry through the Ardennes. Known for his ruthless efficiency, Peiper's mission was to capture key bridges and advance toward the Meuse River. But on December 17th, near the Belgian town of Malmedy, his men captured over 100 American prisoners. Instead of sending them to the rear, the SS troops opened fire. 84 unarmed Americans were murdered in the snow. When the massacre became known, it ignited outrage across the Allied lines. The phrase, "Remember Malmedy," became a battle cry. From that point on, American soldiers fought with a hardened resolve. This was no longer just a battle, but a fight for justice. While Bastogne held its ground, General George S. Patton was on the move. He had promised Eisenhower that he would turn his entire Third Army north within 48 hours, a nearly impossible task in the snow-choked roads of Belgium. But Patton's men did the impossible. They marched day and night, through sleet and ice, their tanks sliding across frozen roads. By December 26th, they reached the outskirts at around 4:50 p.m. Elements of the 37th Tank Battalion broke through the German lines and entered the town. An officer greeted the weary paratroopers with the words, "Merry Christmas." For the soldiers of Bastogne, it was the greatest gift imaginable. They were free. With Bastogne relieved, the German advance began to collapse. Their momentum was gone. Their tanks stood empty, engines silent, as fuel ran dry. The Allies now had control of the air again, and every German movement was bombed relentlessly. By the final days of December, it was clear Hitler's gamble had failed. But the fighting was far from over. Even as the German offensive faltered, some of the fiercest battles of the campaign were still to come. The Americans were determined to push the enemy back, to erase the Bulge from the map. The Battle of the Bulge was not only a military conflict, it was a human tragedy. Entire towns were destroyed. Thousands of civilians lost their homes. A Belgian farmer named Henry Bastogne wrote after the war, "We had no power, no food, no safety. The sky burned at night, and the ground shook with the guns. When the battle was over, nothing was left but ruins and silence." For soldiers, The scars ran even deeper. Many who survived Bastogne spoke little of it afterward. One veteran later said, "We didn't win because we were brave. We won because we refused to die." As the new year approached, both armies were exhausted. German troops began retreating. A German officer's final diary entry, found near the front, read, "The Führer said victory was certain, but the snow has swallowed us. We fight ghosts in the fog. We are finished." On the Allied side, soldiers finally began to believe the end of the war was near, but at a terrible cost. Private Robert Warren of the 101st wrote home on January 1st, 1945. "I made it through the worst winter of my life. We're still here, but many of my friends are not. I'll never forget their faces in the snow." Strategically, the Battle of the Bulge changed everything. The Germans lost over 100,000 men, soldiers, tanks, and aircraft they could never replace. The Allies suffered around 80,000 casualties, but they had the manpower and resources to recover. Most importantly, the battle proved that the German army was no longer invincible. The myth of Nazi strength was shattered in the frozen forests of Belgium. As January 1945 began, the snow began to thaw, revealing the true horror beneath entire fields of destroyed tanks, burnt vehicles, and fallen soldiers. In Bastogne, the streets were littered with wreckage. Children emerged from cellars, blinking in the pale sunlight, searching for family members who hadn't survived. The war was not yet over, but the tide had finally turned for good. In just 6 weeks, the Battle of the Bulge became the largest and bloodiest fight ever fought by the U.S. Army. It was a clash of courage, chaos, and endurance. A battle fought not only against the enemy, but against nature itself. The soldiers who stood their ground in Bastogne, who froze in the forests, and fought through the fog, became part of a legend. Ordinary men who faced impossible odds and refused to yield. As one survivor later said, "It wasn't about winning medals. It was about holding the line, because if we broke, everything behind us would fall." The winter inferno was ending, but one final chapter remained: the counterattack, the collapse of the German dream, and the dawn of victory. By the end of December 1944, the German advance had lost momentum. Fuel shortages immobilized tanks, artillery ran low on shells, and soldiers were exhausted and starving. The very weather that had concealed their attack now betrayed them. Snow began to melt, revealing the devastation and exposing German positions to Allied aircraft. Lieutenant Hans Weber, a German officer, wrote in his journal, "We were promised glory, but all I see is mud, snow, and death. Every day feels like the last." The Allied advance reclaimed towns lost during the offensive. Clairvaux, Wiltz, and Saint-Vith, once overrun by German forces, were now back in Allied hands. Civilians emerged cautiously from hiding, witnessing the wreckage of their homes and streets. In the town of Stavlet, an American soldier recalled, "Houses were shattered. Snow was stained with blood, but the people cheered us as we passed. They hadn't seen hope in weeks." Each liberated town was a step closer to crushing the German offensive entirely. The ultimate objective of Hitler's offensive was the Meuse River. If German forces could reach it, they could split the Allies and potentially force negotiations. But now, the Allies were closing in, cutting off German supply lines and isolating their troops. German units, once confident and aggressive, now retreated under pressure. Corporal Franz Dietrich wrote in his diary, "We run from one village to the next. Every road is blocked, every bridge destroyed. The dream of victory is gone." The battle that had begun as a German blitzkrieg was transforming into a desperate retreat. Even as the battle turned, acts of courage continued on both sides. American medics risked their lives to retrieve wounded soldiers under fire. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Kohl, later awarded the Medal of Honor, led charges against fortified German positions despite heavy casualties. Soldiers on the German side also displayed courage under impossible circumstances. Obergefreiter Karl Müller wrote, "We fight because we must, not because we believe in victory. Every day we live feels like a miracle." The Battle of the Bulge was as much about endurance as it was about strategy. By early January 1945, German forces were in full retreat. The Bulge on the Allied front line began shrinking as American and British forces reclaimed territory. Tanks, trucks, and artillery abandoned in the snow were left for the Allies to capture or destroy. The morale of the German army was shattered. Hitler's hope for a decisive victory had evaporated, like the snow under the winter sun. A captured German officer reported, "We have fought as long as we can. There is nothing left to give. We are finished." The Battle of the Bulge was over by January 25, 1945. After 6 weeks of brutal fighting, casualties were staggering. Americans, approximately 80,000, including 19,000 killed. Germans, over 100,000, including 15,000 killed. The Ardennes forests were littered with wrecked tanks, destroyed villages, and frozen bodies. Civilian populations had endured unimaginable suffering. Homes destroyed, families displaced, and lives forever altered. General Dwight D. Eisenhower reflected on the battle. "We faced the enemy at his best and emerged victorious. But the cost was high. The courage and sacrifice of our soldiers will never be forgotten." The Battle of the Bulge was not just a strategic victory, it was a testament to human endurance. Private First Class John O'Neill wrote in his diary, "I never thought I'd see my family again. But every morning I woke up, I fought, because if I gave up, there would be no tomorrow." German soldiers, too often recognized the futility of the fight. But many continued to battle in harsh conditions until the very end. The war in Europe was far from over, but the Ardennes had claimed its place in history as one of the most intense and defining conflicts of World War II. Following the Bulge, the Allies continued their advance into Germany. By March 1945, Allied forces had crossed the Rhine River, and the fall of Nazi Germany became inevitable. The courage, sacrifice, and resilience shown during those 6 weeks in the Ardennes became legendary. Bastogne, Momedi, Clairboch's names forever etched in the memory of those who lived through it. The Battle of the Bulge was a collision of strategy, desperation, and survival. It was Hitler's last gamble, a battle meant to reverse the tide of war. Instead, it revealed the strength of the Allied forces and the limits of the German military. For every soldier, there was a story of courage, fear, and endurance. For every town, a story of destruction and hope. And for history, the lesson was clear. Even the most cunning plans cannot overcome courage, determination, and the will to survive. Private Robert Warren, who survived Bastogne, reflected decades later, "We were ordinary men thrown into extraordinary circumstances. But we stood, we fought, and we survived. That's all anyone can ask for." And so, the Battle of the Bulge came to an end. A final, desperate gamble that failed, but forever marked the courage and resilience of those who fought. Thank you for joining us on Mindcipher, where history meets mystery. If you want to explore more untold stories, extraordinary battles, and the secrets of the past, subscribe to the channel and step deeper into the world of knowledge and intrigue.